In this video, we're going to talk about the actual commands that you will issue in your Java program to use variables. So number one is declaring variables. In a Java program, before you can use any variable, it must be declared. So to declare a variable, you're going to issue a statement that has this form, right? And these are just placeholders, okay? So you're going to have to give the variable type first, and then a space and the variable name followed by a semicolon. All right, so here are a bunch of the different types. In fact, just about every single type that we've talked about up until this point. Here are some declaration statements. So here is the actual Java code to declare a bunch of different variables. So here I'm declaring a variable of type byte called number of students. Here's a variable of type short called day number, and so on and so forth. So you can see how those go. They all have this exact same format, the variable type as well as the variable name. Okay, and down here, these are all the primitive types. Here is a reference type example, right? I have string and then last space, last name, semicolon. All right, so anytime you want to use a variable, you must declare it by having a statement of that form. All right, next up, the next thing that we'll have to do all the time with variables is to change the values of the variables. To change the value of a variable, you're going to use what's called the assignment operator, which in Java is just an equal sign. So you have to be really careful about the equal sign. You cannot think about it in the same way that you think about the equal sign in math class, okay? So an assignment statement is just a statement that changes the value of a variable. And they have this form right here. The variable name must be on the left side. So this is what I was talking about, the difference in math class. In math class, you could have an equation like x equals 5 and 5 equals x. That is essentially, in math class, the same statement, but that will not work in Java. The variable name must be on the left-hand side. Then you have the equal sign, the assignment operator, and then some expression over here. And I forgot the semicolon over here. So there should be a semicolon here. So how that works is that the Java compiler will try to boil down this expression and figure out exactly what it's equal to, and then it will store the result inside this variable name. Whatever was inside the value of that variable before will now be completely gone, and it will have a new value in there. So here are some examples of assignment statements. Here I am taking the value of 35 and I am storing it in this variable right here, number of hits. And that's an int type. So the type of number of hits variable would be int. All right, next up, I am taking the value of this expression and storing it in the variable average. Okay, so what the compiler will do is figure out what this is. It will do the math here and figure out what that value is, and then once it figures that value, it will store it in this variable average right here. So these pieces of information here are of the double type, okay, and I can tell that because they have a decimal in here, and for we're going to use double for the decimal point type, okay. So in Java, there is a difference between 3.0 and 3. If you type in 3 without the variable or without the decimal point after it, Java will assume that that is an int variable. Okay. Whereas if you type 3.0, Java will assume that you mean the double value 3.0. So that's an easy thing to kind of gloss over when you're writing programs. That decimal point makes a big difference. In math class, it wouldn't make a difference, right? We would kind of treat those as being the same, but in Java, you cannot do that. Right here, I am changing the value of a string variable. I'm storing the name Steinberg or the word Steinberg in the last name. Here, this is of type char, so I'm storing the character capital R in middle initial. and then I am storing the false, keyword false, right, in is positive, which is a Boolean type variable. All right, so that's how you would change the value of a variable. Okay, variable initialization. So using the assignment operator to give a variable a value for the first time in your program is called variable initialization. So in your program, when you want to use a variable, then you will need to declare it like we talked about before, and then you will need to give it a value most of the time. So the initialization statement will look like this. And so here are some examples. So these examples are all sort of a combined declaration and initialization. You can do it separately. You can have a separate declaration and an initialization, but Java allows you to combine the declaration and initialization into a single statement, which is convenient over here. So here are a bunch of different examples of variable initialization. Finally, the last thing that we want to talk about in this section is displaying the value of a variable. Sometimes you will want to know, what value is has been stored in a variable, and so all you need to do is to just put the variable name inside of a system.out.println method. So for instance, here I have a variable declaration and initialization. Okay, int number of hits equals 11. So here I'm storing the value of 11 inside number of hits, and then sometime later in your program you might want to look inside number of hits and see what value is stored there, and you can do that by just simply putting it inside a system.out.println statement and then the name of the variable. Notice there's no quotes here. Okay, if you put quotes around number of hits, the exact word, the literal word number of hits will be printed, and that's not what we want. So if you put a variable name inside here, the compiler will say, oh, okay, I need to go and look in that memory location and see what number is stored here. In this example, then we would just get the number 11 printed out there, and assuming that there's no code, other code here inside this program. So, all right, so that's about it for the types of statements that we will need to issue in this. We'll do one more example video where we just show the basic use of these different statements.